The following is a Spirit Street production.
You know, we had Greg Barnes on from North Carolina a couple of weeks ago talking to us a little bit about North Carolina. We'd heard rumors about them possibly wanting to leave the ACC and kind of the ACC's demise. Well, there's some other things that are going on with North Carolina, so we're bringing Greg back to talk to him a little bit about that and North Carolina athletics. This is the Big 12 Insiders.
Welcome to the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show, presented by Synergy Financial Partners. Now let's go to booming North Texas, home of Studio 73. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
All right, everybody. Thank you again for joining us on Big 12 Insiders. Again, this is Big B, Brien Hanley. Today, again, we've got Greg Barnes from Inside Carolina, who covers North Carolina for 24/7 Sports. Greg, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on again.
No problem. Thank you. Again, everybody, just wanted to remind everybody, continue to like, follow, subscribe. We appreciate all the support that everybody's had for us out there. We thank you. First off, Greg, let's kind of recap. You know, we talked last time, and again, we appreciate you giving us your time today. North Carolina, there had been some rumblings. Basically, they were in a wait-and-see pattern on what was going on with the Clemson lawsuit and the Florida State lawsuit. They were like, you know, Clemson's kind of the, hey, ACC, let's see what's going on behind the scenes. Florida State's kind of the opposite of, nope, we just won out. Too bad, so sad. And North Carolina's like, hey, let's just see what all of this is going on there. I mean, is all of that still hold true with what's going on with North Carolina?
Certainly so. And you mentioned FSU. FSU has kind of been barking since last fall, really dating back to August.
Yeah.
And it took them getting the short end of the stick in the college football playoff to really take this to another level. And as you mentioned, Carolina has kind of been taking a wait-and-see approach. Although what we have learned really in recent weeks is there's kind of two factions in play. Bubba Cunningham has said that he wants to continue to be a good partner to the ACC, while at the same time, making sure that UNC is well taken care of and making sure that UNC is maximizing this position, right. And in terms of being attractive to all options. And then you've got another group who is much more like, look, the ACC's had its chances. Really haven't done the job that they have needed to do to boost revenue. And therefore, everything that Carolina does, especially in the athletic department, needs to be viewed through the lens of, hey, we're trying to establish North Carolina as a program that will be attractive to the SEC in the Big Ten and whoever else is interested. Right. And everything needs to be operating through that lens. And so we saw that in the last couple of weeks of some of that frustration simmering up into public view. And that led to some theatrics at some Board of Trustees meetings a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, and that was kind of the next question. You know, it seemed like there was some rumblings that the Board of Trustees kind of got frustrated with Bubba Cunningham because it didn't seem from the outside looking in, and I'm sure you have more on this, that it didn't seem like they were on the same page, that it was more of maybe Bubba Cunningham wanted to be in the ACC. But from my perspective, though, Greg, it looked like it's not that he's saying we want to be in the ACC. It's like, look, ACC, get your act together so we can figure this out. And if you won't get your act together, we're just going to go ahead and we'll move on. Where Board of Trustee members maybe are saying, sorry, too bad, so sad, ACC. You had your chance, kind of what you mentioned. You had your chance. We're moving on. And, Bubba, you need to get on board with that. Is that kind of the grumblings there?
Yeah, I think that's fairly accurate. And I think some of the frustration that came out, there was a couple of Board of Trustees meetings that kind of played a role into this. But there was an emergency meeting called the beginning of that week. And one of the comments that was said in the open forum was that back at the end of last year, I believe it was in November, December, that one of the initial budgets that had been provided from Bubba Cunningham in the athletic department was that Carolina was looking at a $17 million shortfall.
Right.
And there was attempts by the board of trustees to kind of get specifics on why that was occurring for several months, and because of different things, schedules, and the meetings are only once a month, blah blah blah. They had not received the information that they wanted to receive in terms of the specifics of that, and so there was some frustration there voiced. And that's really where it kind of comes from. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. Bubba, he dealt with the NCAA investigation for North Carolina for 5.5 years. Right. That was pretty much all he did for 5.5 years. So he understands the politics and plays behind the scenes with the NCAA, with the ACC office, with all the presidents and athletic directors when they get into the board meetings. And so he's playing it from a very specific angle of, look, we like being in the ACC. We've had a great relationship with them dating back to 1953. But at the same time, we have to do what's best for North Carolina.
Right.
It really is kind of threading the needle of, hey, maybe the ACC can pull a rabbit out of the hat.
Right.
Maybe somehow they convince Notre Dame to join the ACC. And all these questions about revenue gaps is over.
Right.
Now it's not going to happen. Well, I think we all know Notre Dame's not joining the ACC, but those are the types of things you have to kind of have contingency plans for. Right. And Bubba's playing that political game, and he plays it as well as anybody.
Right. And I think from an athletic director standpoint, you have to have somebody that does that. They've got to be able to play both sides, because if not, especially in today's day and age where you've got to be flexible, you're just asking for trouble if you don't do that. Now, one thing that you touched on, Greg, earlier, and I'll just bring it to you this way, I'm not sure that the trustees should be worried about North Carolina being wanted by either the Big Ten or the SEC. North Carolina seems to be the school that everybody is going after, or would be one of the schools, if something were to happen, would be to go to after. Can you kind of explain and maybe tell people why North Carolina is that? And it's not a knock or anything against North Carolina. It's just explain to everybody, because when most people are thinking, okay, football is running all of this, and North Carolina doesn't have the greatest football reputation out there. But North Carolina, 100%, and for people that don't know, North Carolina will be one of the first people taken if the ACC were to implode. They might be the very first school that would be taken, in my opinion. Kind of explain to people why that is.
Yeah, it's a good question. And the way to think about it is this. Everybody is so caught up in football. For good reason. Football is driving all this revenue, all this realignment, no doubt. However, take FSU for an example. FSU has a great football program, has for a long time, very attractive from that standpoint. When you look at, let's say, the SEC, what's going to be desirable with FSU within the SEC? And the issue that I think the Seminoles run into is you're very close to Gainesville. Mm-hmm. You're very close to Athens. Mm-hmm. You're not that far away from Columbia.
No.
So what are you gaining other than a good football program? Because it's not a great basketball program.
Right.
Baseball is pretty good. Your academics is not elite of the elite.
Nope.
But location-wise, you've got a lot of these SEC schools around Tallahassee. So are you bringing in that much in terms of television share? Which is why football is so important, because of media contracts.
Right.
But when you take a program like North Carolina, yeah, you're right. I mean, the football program has just kind of been mediocre for a long, long time, other than a few years here and there. But Mac Brown has shown, especially his first time in Chapel Hill, that the football program can be relevant nationally.
Right.
The basketball program is one of the best in the country, has been for a long, long time. Athletic program wise is one of the top in the country. Academics is up there. So you have all these things, but probably most importantly, beyond some of those things, is there's not an SEC program or a Big 10 program or a Big 12 program in North Carolina. And the same can be said for Virginia. And so when we've reported this, but we've talked to people behind the scenes, kind of across the various footprints, it's not necessarily Florida State that's at the top of the hierarchy. It's
No.
more programs like the North Carolina and of Virginia, because Virginia's so close to DC, so you have that market. All these different types of things kind of come into play here. And then you get into the branding aspect. North Carolina's done a very good job with that over the years.
Right.
So that's kind of the interesting conversations. Your Florida State people say, hey, yes, it's all football and we've got a great football program. Yes, you do. But there's a lot more that goes into that when you start talking about realignment.
Right. Well, and another thing, and we touched on it earlier, talking about Florida State, is yes, you have a great football program. Yes, you have a great football reputation, and a brand, but that didn't help you this past year in the college football playoff. That didn't help them at all. So that's the whole thing. It's like, yes, you do. But then again, how big is it? Because they chose Alabama and Texas over Florida State, who, again, we can get into all the specifics, but when it comes down to it, at least in my opinion, it was about money and where fans were going to be the most upset. Who did you want to be watching the college football playoff more? And the committee decided, you know what? We would rather have the southeast of Alabama and Texas watching versus Florida State, because there are way more Alabama, SEC, and Texas fans than there are Florida State fans, and that's just a fact. So I 100% agree with you as far as talking about Florida State. Then on the flip side, talking about North Carolina, I think the days, and I'll be honest with you, Greg, I think the days of looking for the actual markets are over. I think it's more of the days they're looking for brands. And North Carolina is that brand that everybody knows.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's certainly a good argument. And when you look at North Carolina's financials, I mean, the basketball team does
Makes
tremendously well. It really does. It makes a lot of
Right.
money. And yes, the football program is not a massive moneymaker, but in terms of net profits, it's right there with the basketball program.
Right.
And so I think that the fact that North Carolina is so sustainable and is such in a good position from what it's done. And Bubba Cunningham has made that point, right? He's made the point of, look, we don't have the most money, but we haven't had the most money for a long time. And yet we've had a lot of success, not only in basketball, but in a lot of the non-revenue sports. So now you have the conversation, well, if you start getting some SEC money or some Big Ten money, now all of a sudden everything explodes for you. And that's one of the interesting conversations is how do you want to have all the money? Do you have to have all the money?
Right.
And if you don't, how big of a gap can you handle? And that's a lot of the conversation taking place in Chapel Hill.
Absolutely. We're going to take a quick break here. We'll be right back on the other side of this. Talk to Greg about what North Carolina is thinking. What are their feelings about the new House versus NCAA settlement and how they're going to move forward? We'll be right back again. One word from our sponsor with Synergy Financial Partners.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the vision is to build the world's largest consumer financial education and empowerment company. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's return to Studio 73.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Big 12 Insiders. Again, this is Brien Hanley. Today, again, we are joined by Greg Barnes, who covers University of North Carolina for 24/7 Sports. So, Greg, let me ask you this question. We had the settlement, all the schools, or the Power Five anyway, the conferences, had this House versus NCAA settlement. How is North Carolina? First off, what's the thinking there? What are their thoughts behind it? And moving forward, now I know everybody moving forward, I don't think everybody knows exactly how things are going to play out because I don't think it's all been decided as of yet. But what are the thoughts in North Carolina with all this madness going on?
Well, I think everybody kind of knew that something like this was coming.
Right.
And if you look at kind of the math involved, if the settlement hadn't have occurred now, if they had pushed it back to 2025, you're talking about double the amount.
Correct.
And then if they had gone to court and they lost, I mean, you're talking bankruptcy for the NCAA. and how that affects all the athletic programs. So I think this is kind of best case scenario, probably. And part of the issue is that North Carolina understands, and everybody understands, that this is going to be another, what, 20 million probably?
Oh, yeah.
They're going to have to set aside out of the budget annually. And that's why we mentioned earlier the potential for a $17 million shortfall.
That's
when you
problem,
start adding another 20 million on top, it gets to be problematic very quickly. And that's another reason that North Carolina, let me put it like this. The urgency is there of saying, okay, we're already fighting an uphill battle. Now we're talking about another 20 million.
Right.
We need to do something quick to try to increase revenue and keep pace with the SEC and the Big Ten.
Right. Well, and now here's another question that falls, and we've talked on this show as we've covered this topic several different times, is a lot of schools are going to be faced with some tough decisions. And one of those decisions is cutting athletic programs. Are there any talks that North Carolina may be in that same boat of, you know what, look, sorry, if this is what we're going to have to do, some of these programs out there are going to have to go?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's in the works in terms of that's probably the next step of this conversation. If everybody get on the same page, it has not gotten there yet. And I do think one of the interesting components here is when you start talking about cutting non-revenue sports, the programs that have the biggest deficits are not the programs that people consider cutting.
No, correct.
For example, North Carolina, the latest financial data we have from 2022-23, women's basketball was in a $5 million hole. Men's baseball, I guess baseball in general, was a $2 million hole. So nobody wants to cut baseball, obviously. I mean, everybody's enjoying Carolina this past weekend advance in the regionals. So it's not the programs that you want to cut, maybe, or are willing to cut, that are the biggest problems anyway. And so that nobody's gotten to that point where they're throwing that out. But let me address that from this standpoint. Tennessee is a good example, just because I saw their data recently. When you look at facilities within their budget, they have a line item for facility upgrades and renovations. And it's only like 10 million, but that's a chunk of change.
Yes.
North Carolina does not have that line item.
Right.
And the reason why is they have to use donor funds to fund pretty much all of their facility upgrades.
Gotcha.
Well, Tennessee is able to use money they get from the SEC to go towards that. And so kind of the point being for UNC is they're having to go to donors for everything, including NIL now.
Right.
Where a program like Tennessee can say, okay, you know what? We have all this media money, so we're going to use that for facility upgrades. We're going to use that for coaching salaries.
Right.
So donors, what we need from you is really to fund the NIL stuff and maybe some of this house settlement stuff. And that's really the difference between the haves and the have-nots right now is when you get into the non-revenue sports, if you've got enough money coming in from TV deals,
it's not a big deal.
It's not that big of a deal.
Yep. Nope. I totally understand. Well, that's the thing. And like I said, we've talked about it a couple different times on the program, is that I think the schools are all going to have to get on the same page with this. I don't think it can be them pulling at each other. I think everybody's got to get in a room and just decide, okay, look, this is the number. Everybody's got to get down to this, because if not, and maybe people don't care, and maybe that's part of this, is maybe the ACC and the Big Ten and the SEC, they all want to think differently, and they don't care if the other one goes away, or, in the Big 12, the same boat. I think it'd be best for everybody involved, including the two big ones, SEC and the Big Ten, that everybody got in a room and just said, okay, this is what we need to do. This is what happened. And then almost say, you can either get on board NCAA or we'll move on without you, because I think it's moving that way anyway, Greg.
I think that's the key point right there. You just hit on it. I think the next step in this whole thing is, what is the NCAA's role?
Right.
Because right now, football did a good job of taking away the postseason from the NCAA.
Mm-hmm.
The NCAA does a good job with eligibility, clearinghouse, those types of things, and they put on pretty good tournaments. Beyond
Right.
that, we can have a discussion about what value they bring.
Mm-hmm.
However, they're sitting on a major moneymaker with the NCAA basketball tournament.
Right.
And I think the next step is, do the Power 5 conferences, do they completely pull away, at least in terms of the revenue sports, from the NCAA? And once you do that, to your point, it becomes much easier for everybody to get into a room and say, look, NCAA is out of the equation now.
Yep.
Let's figure out what's best. And if Alabama deserves more money than, North Carolina or whatever it may be because of football, we can come to an agreement.
Yeah.
But as long as the NCAA is still sitting on that men's basketball tournament, and what are they doing now? They're talking about even expanding that to try to increase revenue on that side of the equation. So I think you're exactly right. I think that's the next shoe to drop is, where does the NCAA stand in all this, and do the major power conferences pull away and kind of go on their own?
Right. I guess, and one other question, and again, we'll try to get you out of here as soon as possible, Greg, is the one thing about all of that stuff, I believe, like I mentioned, they all have to come together. But with the NCAA tournament, with it being the way that it is, what do you see? Do you even think it's a possibility that the Big Four could pull away, knowing what kind of revenue and what kind of tournament the NCAA puts on? And will the NCAA just be okay with, because eventually if that happens and they were to pull away, the NCAA is going bankrupt. I mean, it's going out of business. There's not going to be anything there. But what do you think the actual likelihood of them pulling away is at this point?
Well, I think in terms of the NCAA tournament, I think they would have to reach some type of agreement, because the issue is when you get into the contract aspect of it, it was created very uniquely. And basically the way it's set up is that when, North Carolina is a good example. When North Carolina got to the Sweet 16 this year, they played in 3 games. And so they get, for the ACC, they get 3 credits.
Right.
And those credits stack over a 6-year period. And so you get paid basically for your last 6 years as a conference with all the credits thrown in together. The problem is that for the NCAA, I don't know what the count is now. I think it's like 31 conferences that play a role into this. So large majority are not the Power 5 conferences.
Right.
And so the Power 5 conferences is giving up a lot of credits. And so if they just left, well, then all of a sudden, the TV, CBS and TNT and TBS, that whole crowd is like, wait a minute, all the good teams are gone. And yeah, you may be making more money because those teams are gone in the short term.
Right.
But viewership's going to go down. The value of all this is going to go down. We're losing out on what we signed up for. And so I think before you get to that point, they would have to restructure that deal. And I think that's where the NCAA, the little bit of leverage it has left, is with that tournament. And if they wanted to stonewall and play hardball,
right,
I just don't think it would go well for them. So I think they'd have to be willing to come to some type of compromise and agreement.
Well, and I think you're right, because if the Big Four pulled away and they put on their own tournament, the smaller schools would follow, because they want to be part of that tournament, to be able to say that because look, let's just be honest, their joy is the upsets. And that's what a lot of people watch the tournament for the first weekend anyway, is to see the upsets. Well, those schools are going to they're going to want to be part of that. And I don't think if it was the NCAA or the NAIA or the Brien Hanley Association, those schools aren't going to care. They just want to be a part of that tournament, to say they are part of that tournament. So you're right. I don't think if the NCAA were to try to stonewall them, I'm thinking, that's not going to work, because look what happened to football. They just snatched that right away from you, right out from under your nose, and you couldn't do anything about it. So one last question, and this one is kind of a toss-up, kind of a softball, but to me, it means something, because I've watched college basketball a long time, and I remember when the Dean Dome was built, and I have heard rumors that they are trying to either renovate or build another arena there on campus at North Carolina. Is there any truth to any of that? I guess not maybe the renovation, but to building a new arena.
There is, and there's you have two factions involved, and one is we've got a good spot with the Dean Dome, let's renovate it. The other group is like, hey, we could do like a Nike campus, maybe on the outskirts of campus when you could have Nike come in and have brand new facilities, and you could do luxury boxes. And so, right now I would say they're probably leaning towards more of a renovation, although that's still up for debate. Part of the issue with the Dean Dome is that when they built it on the south side of campus, there was a lot of rock on the south side of the building. Mm-hmm. And really the south and the southwest side is just a ton of rock that they had to go in and blow out. There's nowhere to expand on those two sides. Gotcha. And then you have on the east side, you've got the swimming complex and the basketball museum. So really the only place to go would be north, and there's all kinds of parking and dorms and that type of stuff. So it's not just a matter of saying, hey, we're just going to renovate, because this is the building built back in the mid 80s. Right. So if you start renovating, well, now all your ADA stuff comes into play. Right. You got to be up to code. So I don't know if you've been there, but the concourses are tiny.
Yes.
So all that would have to expand. The whole reason to doing it would be to bring in luxury suites. So there's a lot that would have to go into that. And so some of the conversation is, look, for all the work that would have to take place to renovate the Dean Dome effectively, you can pretty much pay the same amount and get a new arena. And so that's where a lot of that conversation comes from. The traditionalists want to keep it where it is, but we'll see how that plays out. That's next in line for the hot debates in Chapel Hill.
Absolutely. Well, Greg, again, I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your day today to join us. We appreciate everything, all the times that you come on, and we'll have you back as many times as we can, my man. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Brien. Appreciate it.
All right. We're going to be right back. We'll take one final break from our partners at Synergy Financial, and we will be right back.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the mission is to change the way Americans plan for their financial future. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's return to Studio 73.
All right, welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. Thank you guys for number one for sticking with us. We are just about at our goal of where we are trying to be, so I appreciate everybody. Number thing is North Carolina. I mean, look, it's one of the big time programs that are out there. I know their football isn't maybe what a lot of people think that it should be to be wanted by the two big conferences, but it is. It is. It's the brand of North Carolina. And I think that's where a lot of this stuff is going these days. It's the branding. And as mad as Florida State is, I understand it's still not the brand of North Carolina. It just isn't. So we appreciate everybody being here. Thank you guys. We will be back tomorrow talking more Big 12 conference stuff. Thank you guys. This is the Big 12 Insiders. We'll see you tomorrow.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.